Hey, y'all. Hey, it's Teach Me Tuesday, and I am so glad y'all here. I am so excited about the Empathy 14 and today being on the topic of vulnerability. And I believe in modeling. So I am going to go first. Um, I used to be a fighter, and um, it is obvious to me with what's going on with the Montgomery Brawl that there are people who have absolutely no idea what it's like to be involved in a fight. That's number one. Number two, um, recently I got some feedback. Remember, I think day four was about feedback on the Empathy 14. That feedback too is one of the pillars of the Empathy 14. And I got feedback that while I value humor, it is one of my number one values of the plethora of values you can choose, that sometimes my humor doesn't land how I want it to. Specifically, some people consider my humor to be mean spirited, out of brand with empathy, actually, and sometimes passive aggressive. And interestingly enough, just like everybody else who gets feedback, I received it. I was grateful for the level of awareness that came my way. And when I sat with it for a little while, I thought, gosh, do I even want to be in spaces where my humor doesn't have a beautiful place to land? I don't know. That's something for me to think about because, that's the second step. Like awareness is first, then reflection, and then you have to decide like what you want to do with the information, and then take some action on it. So I just got this feedback on Friday. So in the spirit of transparency, I have not processed it yet. In fact, if I'm being quite honest, I'm resistant to the idea that I am passive aggressive because I find myself to be one of those people that if I got something to say, I'm going to say it. And if I said something in a joking way, I feel like I don't mean it to be anything other than that. And that's how we act, when we get feedback. We step down first. And then once we've had an opportunity to sit with it, we can then kind of step up to greatness. But it's Tuesday, and I just got this information Friday afternoon. So I'm going to try to stick real close to brand here and just say that when in a fight, although it's been a long time, you ain't trained like police officers, military personnel, to be able to, like what you see on TV, like, oh, threat, no, not a threat, threat, not a threat. No, if somebody looks like they throwing hands and you in a fight, you throw hands back. Sometimes you don't even see what's happening unless you are a trained fighter. You see, my son is a trained fighter. And so his brain it's a very scientific process when you're a trained fighter. You're thinking about your breathing, you're thinking about technique, you're thinking about how to try to avoid other people hitting you. When you in a street fight, listen, you ain't think about none of that because you ain't had none of that training. So if we can just start there, there's this deck of cards by a company called Actually Curious. I do fully recommend these. They are full of questions that you can ask people to kind of see, to get curious, and curiosity is a way to build empathy. And one of these cards, I couldn't find it before I got on today. The question was, is there ever a time for violence? And I just joined the board of the Raytown Emergency Assistance Program. And I asked that question with some of the board members as an introduction. And interestingly enough, all of us talked about violence as if it were physical violence. And violence, third point, is many things, not always just physical violence. But if we want to just sit with violence, can y'all teach me? See, how is it that people who say they value military and they value military personnel when our national budget, most expensive line item is the military, can people then go, well, no, I don't ever think there's a time for violence? Like, so empathy cannot sit on a bed of hypocrisy. You got these thin blue line flags everywhere. There's one just 3/10 of a mile away from my house. See, got flying it proudly on a dominant street. How can you say that there's never a time for physical violence when you spend most of your budget dollars on weaponry, weapons of mass destruction, war, and killing people? If you look at your local police municipalities and you look at their insurance premiums, because of the number of times that they have engaged in violence when they shouldn't have, and the city has had to take the brunt of that financially, you will get a sense for whether or not I hear what you're saying, that you don't condone violence in any way. I hear you. And when all your money is going towards violence, how can you say that? And empathy cannot sit on a bed of hypocrisy. But maybe I'm wrong. Y'all tell me. See, because when I get to watch Black bodies on television being attacked, here's what I hear often through the media, through individuals. Well, what were they doing there? All right. So when the brawl happens in Montgomery, I don't think I've heard anybody ask the question, well, what were those people who were the instigators? What were they doing there? You see, I don't hold you accountable to anything I say. I only hold you accountable to what you say. What were they doing there? You see, the man doing his job, they both ain't supposed to be there. And it is there. And he's doing his job. You see, when police officers brutalize people, and I'm talking about trans women, children. Just last week, there was some police officer harassing some little Black child, folk calling the police on folk. The question comes up, what were you doing there? And we also say that the police are just doing their job. You see, that Black man was just doing his job. So you see, when you play the tape out, that's also a form of empathy. And we're in the middle of our empathy 14. So I want you to imagine that you're this Black man, you kind of out of shape. I don't know why he's working there. Let's try to imagine that he has another job and he's, picking up a little coins on the side. I don't know. But he's doing his job and he gets punched in the face for doing his job. Not once, because the first time he got hit, he did not hit that person back. See, he got hit twice before he threw that cap and then started to defend himself. You see, we have to use appropriate language. I don't know, y'all teach me, but the appropriate language is there ever a time to condone defending yourself? You see, because you tell me, if somebody punches you in the face 2 times, are you going to do anything back? And I think it's interesting when we can sit around the table with our little cards, which I fundamentally appreciate these cards. And I think everyone should buy them a set so that they can talk with their family and friends and push back on what people say they believe. Because listen, when we sitting around the conference table, I don't know, y'all teach me. When you answering the question, is there ever a time for violence? Most people are like, no, except in the case of self-defense. That was self-defense. Empathy cannot sit on a bed of hypocrisy. And then he's defending himself. Another person comes in with the jujitsu knee. Have y'all seen the video of my son taking that knee to people's ribs? It takes them down, as it did this Black man. And then there are like 3 other people, men, who start beating him while he's on the ground. And a woman runs in and kicks him. You see, we have to start the story there. Because what do you think would happen if no one came to his defense? And part of the reason why Black people all over the nation are laughing and appreciating this is because we have persistently watched time and time and time again where no one comes to the defense of the person who is being assaulted, and it resulted in death. We don't have one example that I know of when somebody is just recording and it did not end in the death of the Black person being assaulted. And so lean in and try to imagine, what do you want to happen if it were you? I don't know, but y'all teach me. I want somebody to come to my defense if I'm being jumped and then a person from an opposite gender kicks me while I'm on the ground. See, but here's what I am hearing. Oh my gosh, all of this violence is just too much. Well, I want to go back to the little deck of cards. Why aren't we just thinking about physical violence? Because I would argue that it is absolutely an act of terror and violence, the way we fund educational systems such that Black and brown children don't get equitable education. I don't know, y'all teach me. I would argue that it is absolutely an act of violence to ensure that where the most Black and brown people live, there's a food apartheid, systematic removal of grocery stores. I would argue that's violence. I would argue that the fact that whenever someone calls the police on a Black person, they know in their spirit that they are creating a situation in which the entire circumstance will be escalated. And because of internalized racial prejudice, people will end up being hurt, harmed, all the things. That's an act of violence. I would argue that when the lowest levels of corporations are full with Black and brown bodies and you don't see any of that representation at the leadership level, and you know that that's how people gain wealth, act of violence. The fact that there are so many foods that we allow for people to be fed and push them as if they're healthy in this country, knowing that they disproportionately impact poor people and Black and brown people, act of violence. Act of violence. The fact that we can reverse or at least stop chronic kidney disease, but don't say nothing to folk until they at stage 3, stage 4, when they need to be on dialysis, and that disproportionately impacts Black people, and the dialysis centers are all over urban cores. Act of violence. So you tell me, you teach me. You see, empathy cannot sit on a bed of hypocrisy. And so I will just let you know, when someone says, oh my gosh, nobody is talking about the fact that a grown man hit a woman with a chair, watch the video. What in the world did she do prior to that moment? Now listen, I don't want to be hit in the head with no chair. I do not want to be hit in the head with a chair. Absolutely not. But I want you to roll the tape back. Roll the tape back. Roll the tape back. And watch what that woman was doing. And also, in this particular situation, what would typically come up is, what was she doing there? And then when we consider the fact that the gentleman who started this didn't comply, oh, how many times have we heard, why don't they just comply? What I am grateful for beyond measure is that the police officers in Montgomery used pepper spray. They used takedown techniques that did not include putting their knees on anybody's neck, because that gentleman was immediately restrained and handcuffs put on him, because clearly he had been triggered and is not a trained fighter, and he probably didn't even recognize that that was a woman. Unc was just swinging that chair. Okay. He's like, oh, let me find this woman and just hit her with a chair. That is absolutely not what happened. And so on this Teach Me Tuesday, because I value humor, here's what I'm going to leave you with. And y'all can get on me later. You can get on me later. Because every day in this country, there are acts of violence and terror at the personal level, the interpersonal level, and the institutional level against Black people. At least half of our states have specific legislation trying to ensure that the history of race and racism in this country does not get taught to children. Why not? It's been evidence-based and proven that teaching the historical narrative does not cause white children to feel worse about themselves, and it does not harm Black children. In fact, it creates a more empathetic and compassionate student body in general. So what would be your motivation for not teaching the truth? It's an act of violence. And so if you ask me, do I condone violence? I am not the person to tell you I do not condone violence. There are situations and circumstances. If it were not for violence, I'd still be a slave. Because if you believe people who were making all this money off the backs of my ancestors were just going to miraculously give up the institution of chattel slavery just because of the goodness of their heart, child, please, I got some beachfront property to sell you right down the street. Because there ain't no way. That is absolutely not going to happen. And I believe that part of the reason why we struggle so much with empathy is because we switch the narrative when it suits us. See, I watched that video so many times from so many different angles because I'm just like, the skip to Malou was like, I just wonder, can somebody look up and tell me if the Maasai warriors used to skip? Because somebody somewhere in our ancestral lineage used to skip right before they would like take people down. And if you don't know, the Maasai tribe, they are some of the fiercest fighters in the world. But you know what their primary question is every day when they greet each other? How are the children? And the response is, the children are well. And they are the fiercest warriors ever. And we've got a lot to learn from the Maasai tribe, because some people learn pleasantly and other people learn painfully. And I wasn't there. I ain't gonna tell you what I was gonna do. But if I was the one being beaten, because that man would have been beaten to death. And if you're being honest with yourself, you know that. I would appreciate a 16-year-old child swimming across the bay to save me. And that's the conversation. That is the conversation. You running in there, jumping in there, like, I mean, are you inebriated to jump into a fight and then not expect a fight in return? I have no idea. But here's what I'll say. I watched a little video of the folding chair being interviewed. And I thought to myself, boy, folks sure do have a lot of time on their hands. And when being interviewed, the chair said, look, I didn't come here for charity. I'm going to dish out a little bit. And I believe that part of the reason why in this country we are so hell-bent on having so many guns and so many bullets is because of what happened yesterday. You know, if you don't have arms, that there's no way for you to be able to get away with the pillage and terror that is happening to Black people throughout this country. That's why you need weapons. That's why our lovely former President Ronald Reagan initially instituted gun control laws, because he knew that Black people couldn't be full of weapons. I'm so grateful that not a single person died. And I am so grateful that that man was saved. And I am grateful that the people who saved him, I understand, have all been released. I'm grateful that the mayor of Montgomery talked about the narrative just as it should have been talked about, because I'm telling you, on this vulnerable 8th day of the Empathy 14, that for those of us who have involved ourselves in pugilistic activities, ain't nobody paying attention to the gender of the person they hitting with a chair. It is absolute trying to save myself. So I believe all the ancestors are saying, thank you for finally standing up instead of sitting back and watching somebody be beaten to death. I don't know. Y'all teach me, but empathy cannot sit on a bed of hypocrisy. It's Teach Me Tuesday. We've got plenty work to do.